You said I could come, said Molly, and that you would tell me everything. I think you know everything, said Cynthia sadly. Maybe you don't know my reasons, but you know the trouble I'm in. I've been thinking a lot, said Molly, shyly and unsure. And I can't help thinking if you told my dad. Before she could finish, Cynthia stood up. No, said Cynthia. I won't do that. Unless I leave here right away. And you know I have nowhere else to go, without warning, I mean. Maybe my uncle would take me in. He's family and would have to help me even if I'm in trouble. Or maybe I could get a job as a governess. A good governess I would be. Please, Cynthia, don't talk like that. I don't believe you've done anything very wrong. You say you haven't, and I believe you. That awful man has somehow got you into trouble, but I am sure my dad could fix it if you would just make him your friend and tell him everything. No, Molly, said Cynthia, I can't, and that's final. You can tell him if you want, but let me leave the house first. Give me that much time. You know I would never tell anything you didn't want me to tell, Cynthia, said Molly, very hurt. Would you really not, dear, said Cynthia, taking her hand. Will you promise me that? Promise me seriously? It would be such a relief to tell you everything, now that you know so much. Yes, I'll promise not to tell. You shouldn't have doubted me, said Molly, still a little sad. Okay, I trust you. I know I can. But do think of telling my dad and getting him to help you, insisted Molly. Never, said Cynthia, firmly, but more quietly than before. Do you think I forget what he said about that terrible Mr. Cox, how strict he was, and how long I was in trouble if I'm even out of it now? I am one of those people, as my mom sometimes says, I cannot live with people who don't think well of me. It may be a weakness or a sin, I'm not sure, and I don't care, but I really cannot be happy in the same house with anyone who knows my faults and thinks they are bigger than my good points. Now you know your dad would do that. I have often told you that he, and you too, Molly, have higher standards than I have ever known. Oh, I couldn't bear it. If he knew he would be so angry with me, he would never get over it, and I have liked him so much. I do like him so much. Well, never mind, dear, he won't know, said Molly. Because Cynthia was starting to cry again, at least, we won't talk about it now. And you'll never talk about it again. Never, promise me, said Cynthia, taking her hand eagerly. Never until you let me. Now let me see if I can help you. Lie down on the bed, and I'll sit by you, and let's talk it over. But Cynthia sat down again in the chair by the dressing table. When did it all begin? Said Molly, after a long pause. Long ago, 4 or 5 years. I was such a child to be left all alone. It was the holidays, and my mom was away visiting, and the Donaldsons asked me to go with them to the Worcester Festival. You can't imagine how fun it all sounded, especially to me. I had been shut up in that big lonely house at Ashcombe, where my mom had her school. It belonged to Lord Cumnor, and Mr. Preston, as his agent, had to see it all painted and papered. But, besides that, he was very close to us. I think my mom thought no. I'm not sure about that. And I have enough blame to give her without telling you anything that may be just imagination. Then she paused and sat still for a minute or two, remembering the past. Molly noticed the tired and worried look on Cynthia's beautiful face. She could see how much Cynthia must have suffered from this hidden problem. Well, anyway, we were close to him, and he came to our house a lot and knew as much as anyone about my mom's affairs and all the details of her life. I'm telling you this so you can understand how natural it was for me to answer his questions when he came one day and found me not crying, because you know I don't cry much, even though I did today, but upset and frustrated because, though my mom had written to say I could go with the Donaldsons, she never said how I was supposed to get any money for the trip, much less for clothes, and I had outgrown all my last year's dresses, and as for gloves and boots, in short, I really had hardly any. Clothes decent enough for church. Why didn't you write to her and tell her all this? Said Molly, half afraid of appearing to blame her by asking. I wish I had her letter to show you. You must have seen some of my mom's letters. Don't you know how she always seems to leave out just the important part of every fact? In this case, she talked a lot about the fun she was having and the kindness she was receiving, and her wish that I could have been with her, and her happiness that I too was going to have some fun. But the only thing that would have really helped me she left out, and that was where she was going to next. She mentioned that she was leaving the house she was staying at the day after she wrote, and that she would be home by a certain date. But I got the letter on a Saturday, and the festival began the next Tuesday. Poor Cynthia, said Molly. Still, if you had written, your letter might have been forwarded. I don't want to be hard on you, but I really don't like the idea of you being friends with that man. Said Cynthia, sighing. It's easy to judge rightly after you see the bad results of a wrong decision. I was just a young girl, almost still a child, and he was a friend to us then, besides Mom. He was the only friend I had. The Donaldsons were just kind and nice people we knew. I am sorry, said Molly humbly. I have been so happy with my dad. I can't understand how different it must have been for you. Different. I should think so. The worry about money made me hate my life. We couldn't say we were poor, it would have hurt the school, but I would have gone without if Mom and I had gotten along well, like you and Mr. Gibson do. It wasn't the poverty. It was that she never seemed to want me with her. As soon as the holidays came, she went off to some big house or another, and I guess I was at a very awkward age to have around when visitors came. Girls at my age are so sharp at figuring out motives and asking awkward questions about the little tricks and turns in conversations. They have no clear idea of what are the truths and lies of polite life. Anyway, I was very much in Mom's way, and I felt it. Mr. Preston seemed to feel it too, for me, and I was very thankful to him for kind words and sympathetic looks, tiny bits of kindness that would have gone unnoticed by you. So this day, when he came to see how the workers were doing, he found me in the empty schoolroom, looking at my old summer hat and some old ribbons I had been cleaning, and half-worn-out gloves, a sort of rag fair spread out on the table. I was very upset just looking at that shabbiness. He said he was so glad to hear I was going to this festival with the Donaldsons. Old Betty, our servant, had told him the news, I believe. But I was so worried about money, and my pride was so hurt about my shabby clothes that I was in a bad mood, and said I shouldn't go. He sat down on the table, and little by little he made me tell him all my troubles. I do sometimes think he was very nice in those days. Somehow, I never felt it was wrong or foolish to accept his offer of money at the time. He had 20 pounds in his pocket, he said, and really didn't know what to do with it. Wouldn't need it for months. I could repay it, or rather Mom could, when it suited her. She must have known I would need money and most likely thought I should ask him. 20 pounds wouldn't be too much. I must take it all, and so on. I knew, at least I thought I knew, that I would never spend 20 pounds, but I thought I could give him back what I didn't use, and so, well, that was the start. It doesn't sound so very wrong, does it, Molly? No, said Molly hesitantly. She did not want to be a harsh judge, and yet she really disliked Mr. Preston. Cynthia went on. Well, with boots and gloves, and a hat and a coat, and a white dress, which was made for me before I left on Tuesday, and a silk dress that followed to the Donaldsons, and my trips, and all, there was very little left of the 20 pounds, especially when I found I needed a ball dress in Worcester, because we were all going to the ball. Mrs. Donaldson gave me my ticket, but she looked serious at my idea of going to the ball in my white dress, which I had already worn 2 evenings at their house. Oh, dear! How nice it must be to be rich! You know, continued Cynthia, smiling a little, I can't help knowing that I'm pretty and that people admire me a lot. I found it out first at the Donaldsons. I began to think I did look pretty in my new clothes, and I saw that other people thought so too. I was definitely the belle of the house, and it was very nice to feel my power. The last day or 2 of that fun week, Mr. Preston joined our group. The last time he had seen me was when I was dressed in shabby clothes too small for me, half crying in my loneliness, neglected and with no money. At the Donaldsons I was a little queen, and as I said, nice clothes make nice birds, and all the people were paying attention to me, and at that ball, which was the first night he came, I had more dance partners than I knew what to do with. I suppose he really did fall in love with me then. I don't think he had before. And then I began to feel how awkward it was to owe him money. I couldn't act superior to him like I did to others. Oh! It was so awkward and uncomfortable. But I liked him and felt he was a friend all the time. The last day I was walking in the garden with the others, and I thought I would tell him how much I had enjoyed myself and how happy I had been, all thanks to his 20 pounds. I was beginning to feel like Cinderella when the clock was striking 12, and to tell him it should be repaid to him as soon as possible, though I felt sick at the thought of telling Mom, and knew enough about our affairs to understand how very difficult it would be to come up with the money. The end of our talk came very soon, for, almost to my terror, he began to talk about love to me and to beg me to promise to marry him. I was so frightened that I ran away to the others. But that night I got a letter from him, apologizing for scaring me, renewing his offer, begging for a promise of marriage, to be fulfilled at any date I would please to name. In fact, a most urgent love letter, and in it a mention of my unlucky debt, which was to be a debt no longer, only in advance of the money to be mine later, if only you can imagine it all, Molly, better than I can remember it to tell you. And what did you say? Asked Molly, breathless. I didn't answer it at all until another letter came, begging for a reply. By that time, Mom had come home, and the old daily pressure and complaint of poverty had come back. Mary Donaldson wrote to me often, praising Mr. Preston as enthusiastically as if she had been paid to do it. I had seen him as a very popular man in their group, and I liked him well enough and felt thankful to him. So I wrote and gave him my promise to marry him when I was 20, but it was to be a secret until then. And I tried to forget I had ever borrowed money from him, but somehow as soon as I felt committed to him, I began to hate him. I couldn't stand his eagerness of greeting if he ever found me alone, and Mom began to suspect, I think. I cannot tell you all the details. In fact, I didn't understand them at the time, and I don't remember clearly how it all happened now. But I know that Lady Cuxhaven sent Mom some money to be used for my education, as she called it, and Mom seemed very upset and in very low spirits, and she and I didn't get along at all. So, of course, I never dared to mention the hated £20 to her, but went on trying to think that if I was to marry Mr. Preston, it need never be paid. Very mean and wicked, I guess. But oh, Molly, I've been punished for it. For how I hate that man. But why? When did you start to dislike him? You seem to have put up with it for a long time. I don't know. I began to dislike him before I went to that school in Boulogne. He made me feel as if I was in his power, and by often reminding me of our engagement, he made me critical of his words and ways. There was also an insulting way he treated my mom. Ah, you're thinking that I'm not a very respectful daughter, and maybe I'm not, but I couldn't stand his sneaky remarks about her faults, and I hated how he showed his love for me. Then, after I had been at Lefebvre's school for half a year, a new English girl came, a cousin of his, who didn't know much about me. Now, Molly, you must forget as soon as I've told you what I'm going to say. She used to talk so much and constantly about her cousin Robert. He was the great man of the family, clearly, and how he was so handsome, and every lady was in love with him. Even a lady with a title. Lady Harriet. I bet, said Molly indignantly. I don't know, said Cynthia tiredly. I didn't care at the time, and I don't care now, for she went on to say there was a very pretty widow, too, who made desperate love to him. He had often laughed with them at all her little advances, which she thought he didn't see through. And, oh, this was the man I had promised to marry, and gone into debt to, and written love letters to. So now you understand it all, Molly. No, I don't yet. What did you do when you heard how he had spoken about your mother? There was only one thing to do. I wrote and told him I hated him, and would never marry him, and would pay him back his money and the interest on it as soon as I could. Well, and me. Lefebvre brought me back my letter, unopened, I will say, and told me that she didn't allow letters to gentlemen to be sent by the pupils of her school unless she had seen their contents first. I told her he was a family friend, the agent who managed Mom's affairs. I really couldn't stick to the truth, but she wouldn't let it go, and I had to see her burn it, and to promise her I wouldn't write again before she would agree not to tell Mom. So I had to calm down and wait until I came home. But you didn't see him then? At least, not for some time? No, but I could write, and I began to try and save up my money to pay him. What did he say to your letter? Oh, at first he pretended not to believe I could be serious. He thought it was only a fit of anger, or a temporary offense to be apologized for and covered over with passionate promises. And afterwards? He stooped to threats, and, what is worse, then I became a coward. I couldn't bear to have it all known and talked about, and my silly letters shown. Oh, such letters. I can't bear to think of them, beginning, "My dearest Robert," to that man. But, oh, Cynthia, how could you go and get engaged to Roger? Asked Molly. Why not? Said Cynthia, sharply turning towards her. I was free, I am free. It seemed a way of assuring myself that I was completely free, and I did like Roger. It was such a comfort to be around people who could be trusted, and I wasn't a block of wood or a stone that I couldn't be touched by his tender, unselfish love, so different from Mr. Preston's. I know you don't think I'm good enough for him, and, of course, if all this comes out, he won't think I'm good enough either. Falling into a sad tone very touching to hear, and sometimes I think I'll give him up and go off to some new life among strangers. And once or twice I've thought I would marry Mr. Preston out of pure revenge and have him forever in my power. Only I think I would have the worst of it, for he is cruel in his very soul, like a tiger, with his beautiful striped skin and relentless heart. I have so begged and begged him to let me go without revealing everything. Never mind the exposure, said Molly. It will hurt him more than it will harm you. Cynthia went a little paler. But I said things in those letters about Mom. I was quick to see all her faults and hardly understood the force of her temptations, and he says he will show those letters to your father unless I agree to acknowledge our engagement. He shall not, said Molly, standing up in her anger and standing before Cynthia almost as fiercely as if she were in the presence of Mr. Preston himself. I am not afraid of him. He dare not insult me, or if he does, I don't care. I will ask him for those letters and see if he will dare to refuse me. You don't know him, said Cynthia, shaking her head. He has made many appointments with me, just as if he would take back the money, which has been sealed up ready for him for 4 months, or as if he would give me back my letters. Poor Roger. How little he thinks of all this. When I want to write words of love to him, I stop myself, because I have written words as affectionate to that other man. And if Mr. Preston ever guessed that Roger and I were engaged, he would manage to get revenge on both him and me by giving us as much pain as he could with those unlucky letters, written when I was not 16, Molly, only 7 of them. They are like a bomb under my feet, which could blow up any day, and down will come father and mother and all. She ended bitterly enough, though her words were so light. How can I get them? Said Molly, thinking, because I will get them. With Dad to back me, he dare not refuse. Ah, but that's just the thing. He knows I'm more afraid of your father finding out than anyone else. And yet he thinks he loves you. It is his way of loving. He often says he doesn't care what he does as long as he gets me to be his wife, and that after that he is sure he can make me love him. Cynthia began to cry, out of weariness of body and despair of mind. Molly's arms were around her in a minute, and she pressed the beautiful head to her chest and laid her own cheek upon it, and calmed her with soothing words, just as if Cynthia were a little child. "Oh, it is such a comfort to have told you everything," murmured Cynthia. And Molly replied, "I am sure we have right on our side, and that makes me certain he must and will give up the letters." "And take the money?" added Cynthia, lifting her head and looking eagerly into Molly's face. "He must take the money." "Oh, Molly, you can never manage it all without it coming out to your father. And I would far rather go out to Russia as a governess." "I almost think I would rather—" "No, not that," said she, shuddering away from what she was going to say. "But he must not know, please, Molly. He must not know." "I couldn't bear it. I don't know what I might do." "You'll promise me never to tell him or Mom?" "I never will." "You don't think I would for anything short of saving," she was going to say, "saving you and Roger from pain." But Cynthia broke in. "For nothing. No reason at all should make you tell your father. If you fail, you fail, and I will love you forever for trying, but I will be no worse off than before. Better, actually, for I will have the comfort of your sympathy. But promise me not to tell Mr. Gibson." "I have promised once," said Molly, "but I promise again, so now go to bed and try to rest. You look as white as a sheet. You'll be ill if you don't get some rest, and it's past 2 o'clock and you're shivering with cold." So they wished each other good night. But when Molly got into her room, all her courage left her, and she threw herself down on her bed, still dressed, because she had no energy left for anything. If Roger ever heard of it all by any chance, she felt how it would disturb his love for Cynthia. And yet was it right to hide it from him? She must try to persuade Cynthia to tell it all to him directly when he returned to England. A full confession on her part would greatly reduce any pain he might have on first hearing it. She lost herself in thoughts of Roger, how he would feel, what he would say, how that meeting would happen, where he was at that very time, and so on, until she suddenly woke up and remembered what she had offered and promised to do. Now that the first enthusiasm was over, she saw the difficulties clearly, and the biggest of all was how she was to arrange a meeting with Mr. Preston. How had Cynthia managed? And the letters that had passed between them too? Unwillingly, Molly was forced to realize that there must have been a lot of secret work going on beneath Cynthia's seemingly open behavior, and even more unwillingly, she began to worry that she herself might be led into such actions. But she would try to stay on a straight path, and if she did stray from it, it would only be to save pain to those she loved.